The smell of burning flesh is something you never forget. Neither is the sound of your daughter-in-law's fake gasp of horror as she pretends it was all just a terrible accident. But what really stays with you is the moment you realize that the woman your son married would rather watch you suffer than admit she did it on purpose. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Chen, though most people in our small Connecticut town of Millbrook know me as Maggie. At 68, I thought I had seen enough of life's surprises, both good and bad. I raised my son David as a single mother after my husband walked out when David was just 7 years old. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to keep us afloat. I was a seamstress by day, taking in alterations and custom work, and cleaned office buildings at night. Every sacrifice felt worth it when David graduated summa cum laude from Yale Law School. David had always been my pride and joy. He was the kind of son who called every Sunday, remembered my birthday without Facebook reminders, and still asked for my advice on everything from career decisions to what tie to wear to important meetings. When he started dating Vanessa Morrison 3 years ago, I was thrilled. She seemed perfect for him on paper. Beautiful, educated, from a wealthy family in Greenwich. She had graduated from Wellesley with a degree in art history and worked at a prestigious gallery in Manhattan. Their wedding 2 years ago was everything a mother could dream of. The Morrison family spared no expense, and the ceremony at their country club was featured in Connecticut Magazine. I felt so proud walking down that aisle in the mother-of-the-groom dress Vanessa had helped me pick out. She had been so sweet during the wedding planning, always asking for my opinion, making sure I felt included. I remember thinking how lucky David was to find someone who understood the importance of family. For the first year of their marriage, everything seemed perfect. They bought a beautiful colonial house just 10 minutes from my small cottage, and Vanessa would stop by regularly with expensive pastries from the bakery in town or flowers from the farmer's market. She had this way of making conversation that made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the world. She would ask about my seamstress work, compliment my cooking, and always seemed genuinely interested in my stories about David's childhood. David was happier than I had ever seen him. His law practice was thriving, and he talked constantly about starting a family. Vanessa would smile and nod whenever he brought up having children, though I noticed she always seemed to change the subject rather quickly. I attributed it to nerves. After all, she was only 28, and they had plenty of time. The first crack in the perfect facade appeared about 6 months ago. I had come over to their house to drop off some curtains I had hemmed for their dining room. I used my key, as I always did, calling out as I entered. The house was quiet, but I could hear voices coming from the kitchen. As I approached, I caught fragments of a phone conversation Vanessa was having. "I know, Mother, but what am I supposed to do? She's always here, always hovering. David thinks the sun rises and sets on her, and I'm getting tired of playing the devoted daughter-in-law." There was a pause, and then she laughed, a sound completely different from the warm laugh I was used to hearing. This one was cold, almost cruel. "Oh, trust me, the feeling is mutual. But David would never forgive me if I wasn't sweet to his precious mommy." I stood frozen in the hallway, the curtains heavy in my arms. I had never heard Vanessa speak like that before. The warmth, the genuine interest, the affection I thought she had for me, it was all an act. I quietly retreated, leaving the curtains by the front door with a note saying I had been in a hurry and would come back later to hang them properly. That night, I lay awake thinking about what I had heard. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as a moment of frustration. Everyone needed to vent sometimes, and maybe I had been overstepping without realizing it. I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt and perhaps be more mindful of boundaries. But once you know someone is performing for your benefit, you start to notice things. The way Vanessa's smile never quite reached her eyes when David wasn't looking. How she would glance at her expensive watch when I was talking, as if calculating how much longer she had to endure my presence. The subtle ways she would redirect conversations away from topics I brought up, or how she would position herself so that David was always between us when we were all together. I started visiting less frequently, calling before coming over, being more careful not to impose. I thought maybe if I gave her more space, whatever resentment she was feeling would fade. David noticed the change and asked me about it during one of our Sunday phone calls. "Mom, is everything okay? You seem distant lately. Vanessa mentioned you haven't been by as much." I assured him everything was fine, that I was just trying to give them more privacy as newlyweds. He laughed and told me I was being silly, that they both loved having me around. I wondered if he truly believed that or if he was just saying what he thought I wanted to hear. The situation came to a head 3 weeks ago. David had been in Boston for a week-long legal conference, and I had offered to check on the house while he was away. Vanessa had said she would appreciate the company, claiming she got nervous staying alone in such a big house. I should have known it was too convenient, too perfect an opportunity for her to finally drop the mask completely. I arrived Tuesday evening with homemade lasagna and a bottle of wine, thinking we could have a nice girls' night. Vanessa greeted me at the door with her usual bright smile, but something felt different. There was an edge to her cheerfulness that I couldn't quite place. "Maggie, how wonderful. Come in, come in. I was just about to start dinner, but this is so much better." She took the casserole dish from my hands with exaggerated enthusiasm. "You're such a treasure. No wonder David adores you so much." We settled in the living room with glasses of wine, and for a while, the conversation flowed normally. Vanessa asked about my latest sewing projects, complimented the new scarf I was wearing, inquired about my neighbor Mrs. Patterson's recovering hip surgery. But as the evening progressed and the wine bottle emptied, something shifted. "You know, Maggie," Vanessa said, her voice taking on a slightly sharper tone, "I've been thinking a lot about family dynamics lately. It's fascinating how some families are so." She paused, searching for the word, close. I sensed a trap but wasn't sure how to avoid it. "David and I have always been close, yes. We only had each other for so many years." "Oh, absolutely. It's really quite remarkable." Her smile was still in place, but her eyes had gone cold. "The way you two finish each other's sentences, share all those inside jokes, remember every little detail about each other's lives. Sometimes I feel like I'm watching a married couple rather than a mother and son." The comment hit like a slap. "I beg your pardon?" "Oh, don't get me wrong," Vanessa continued, waving her hand dismissively. "I think it's sweet. Really. It's just that some people might find it a bit intense. Unhealthy, even." I set down my wine glass, my hands beginning to shake with anger. "Are you suggesting that my relationship with my son is inappropriate?" "Oh, goodness no." Vanessa's laugh was bright and artificial. "I would never say that. I'm just observing that David has never really had the chance to become his own person, you know? He's so focused on taking care of you, on making sure you're happy and included in everything. Sometimes I wonder what kind of man he might have become if he'd been allowed to spread his wings a bit more." The implications of what she was saying made my stomach turn. She was painting me as some kind of manipulative mother who had stunted her son's emotional growth. Worse, she was suggesting that David's love and consideration for me was somehow unhealthy rather than admirable. "David is a grown man who makes his own choices," I said quietly, struggling to keep my voice steady. "If he chooses to maintain a close relationship with his mother, that's his decision." "Of course it is," Vanessa agreed readily. "And I would never want to interfere with that. I'm just saying that maybe, now that he's married, it might be time for some adjustments. You understand?" I understood perfectly. She wanted me out of David's life, or at least pushed so far to the periphery that I became irrelevant. This conversation wasn't about family dynamics or healthy relationships. It was about territory, and she was marking hers. I excused myself shortly after, claiming I had an early morning appointment. Vanessa walked me to the door with her usual gracious smile, thanking me for the lasagna and suggesting we do it again soon. But we both knew something fundamental had changed between us. When David returned from Boston, he was full of stories about the conference and excited about some new clients his firm was considering. He seemed oblivious to any tension, and I decided not to burden him with what had happened. After all, what could I really say? That his wife had been perfectly polite while essentially telling me to back off? It would sound petty and jealous. Exactly the kind of behavior that would reinforce Vanessa's narrative about me. Instead, I tried to follow her unspoken directives. I called less frequently, declined dinner invitations, and made excuses when David suggested family outings. I told myself I was being mature, giving them space to build their marriage without interference. But it felt like dying a slow death, watching my relationship with my son gradually diminish from the outside. David noticed, of course. He started showing up at my house unannounced, asking why I seemed distant, why I wasn't coming around as much. I made excuses about being busy with work, feeling tired, wanting to give them privacy. He would look at me with such concern, such genuine confusion, that it broke my heart. This was exactly what Vanessa wanted, for me to be the one pulling away, so she never had to be the villain. The final confrontation came last Monday. David had called Sunday night, insisting that I come for dinner Tuesday evening. They were celebrating some good news, he said, and it wouldn't be the same without me there. His enthusiasm was so genuine, so much like the little boy who used to drag me to see every art project and science fair display, that I couldn't refuse. I spent Monday afternoon making David's favorite dessert, a chocolate bourbon pecan pie. That had been his birthday request every year since he was 12. I even bought a new blouse for the occasion, a soft lavender silk that I had been saving for a special event. I wanted to look nice, to show that I was making an effort. I arrived at their house Tuesday evening with the pie and a bottle of champagne, determined to be the perfect guest. Vanessa answered the door looking stunning as always, her blonde hair perfectly styled and wearing what I recognized as a designer dress that probably cost more than I made in a month. "Maggie. How lovely to see you," she said, air kissing my cheek in that affected way she had adopted since the wedding. "And you brought dessert. How thoughtful." David appeared behind her, practically bouncing with excitement. He looked so handsome in his navy blazer, his dark hair slightly mussed the way it got when he was excited about something. He swept me into one of his bear hugs, the kind that had comforted me through every crisis and celebrated every triumph in our shared life. "Mom, you look beautiful," he said, stepping back to admire my new blouse. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I arrived at their house 40 minutes later with a bag containing ginger tea, homemade chicken broth, and saltine crackers. David met me at the door, already dressed in his best suit but looking haggard with worry. His dark hair was disheveled, and there were circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept much either. "She's been throwing up every hour since about midnight," he explained as he grabbed his briefcase and car keys. I tried to convince her to let me call in sick, but she insisted I go to the meeting. You know how she is about my career. I knew exactly how she was about his career. Vanessa loved being married to a successful lawyer, loved the status and lifestyle it provided. She would never let him jeopardize that, even if she was genuinely ill. "Don't worry about anything," I assured him. "I'll take good care of her." David kissed my cheek gratefully. "I should be back by 4 at the latest. Call me if you need anything, okay? And Mom, thank you. This means everything to me." After he left, I made my way upstairs to the master bedroom. I knocked softly on the door before entering, not wanting to startle Vanessa. The room was dim, with blackout curtains drawn against the morning light. I could make out her form under the covers, her blonde hair spread across the pillow in what even in illness managed to look artfully tousled. "Vanessa? It's Maggie. David asked me to come check on you." She turned toward me slowly, and I was genuinely shocked by her appearance. Her face was pale and drawn, her usual perfect makeup replaced by the sallow complexion of someone who had spent the night being violently ill. For a moment, my maternal instincts overrode everything else, and I felt genuine concern for her well-being. "Oh, honey, you look terrible," I said, moving closer to the bed. "Can I get you anything? Some ginger tea? Ice chips?" Vanessa's response was barely a whisper. "Water, please. Just small sips." I spent the morning playing nursemaid, bringing her water and broth, helping her to the bathroom when needed, and changing the sheets when she had an accident. Despite everything that had passed between us, I couldn't help but feel sorry for her. She was genuinely miserable, and my instincts to care for someone in distress overrode my personal feelings. Around noon, she seemed to be feeling slightly better. The color had returned to her cheeks, and she was able to keep down some of the broth I had made. She even managed a weak smile when I suggested she try to shower while I changed the bedding. Again. "You don't have to do all this," she said as I gathered up the soiled sheets. "I know this isn't how you plan to spend your day." "It's fine," I replied, meaning it. "David was worried about you, and I'm glad I could help." She nodded, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You really would do anything for him, wouldn't you?" Something in her tone made me pause. "He's my son. Of course I would. Even if it meant sacrificing your own happiness? Your own life?" I wasn't sure where this conversation was heading, but I sensed dangerous territory. "I don't see caring for family as a sacrifice." Vanessa studied my face for a long moment. "No, I suppose you wouldn't." She disappeared into the bathroom for her shower, and I busied myself with the laundry and tidying up the bedroom. I was just finishing folding the fresh sheets when she emerged, looking much more like herself in a silk robe with her hair wrapped in a towel. "I feel almost human again," she said, settling into the chair by the window. "Thank you for taking such good care of me." "You're welcome. Are you feeling up to eating something more substantial? I could make you some toast or scrambled eggs." "That sounds wonderful, actually. But first, could you help me with something? I was trying to iron a dress for David's office party tomorrow before I got sick, but I never finished it. Would you mind?" I should have been suspicious. Vanessa had a housekeeper who came twice a week and handled all the laundry and ironing. She also had enough designer clothes that she rarely wore the same thing twice. But she seemed genuinely grateful for my help, and I was still operating from a place of goodwill after our morning of truce. "Of course," I said. "Where's the dress?" She directed me to her walk-in closet, where a navy blue cocktail dress hung on the ironing board that was set up in the corner. It was a beautiful piece, probably worth more than my monthly grocery budget, and I could see why she wanted it to look perfect. I set up the iron and began working on the delicate fabric, being extra careful around the beading and trim. Vanessa sat in the bedroom chair, ostensibly resting but watching me work. There was something about her attention that made me uncomfortable. But I attributed it to her protective feelings about such an expensive garment. "You're really good at that," she commented. "I suppose after all those years of alterations, you could iron anything." "It's all about the right temperature and technique," I replied, adjusting the heat setting for the silk panels. "Different fabrics need different approaches. David always talks about how skilled you are with your hands. How you can fix anything, make anything beautiful. Is that new? The color is perfect on you." I felt Vanessa's eyes on us, cataloging this interaction, probably adding it to her mental file of evidence about our supposedly inappropriate closeness. But David's genuine affection, his uncomplicated love, made me feel human again after weeks of walking on eggshells. Dinner was pleasant enough. David was animated, telling stories about his recent cases and asking about my work. He had always been interested in the craftsmanship aspect of sewing, often joking that he had inherited his attention to detail from watching me work. Vanessa participated in the conversation, but I could sense her impatience, the way she kept glancing at her phone and checking the time. It wasn't until we were clearing the dishes that David finally revealed his news. "Mom, Van and I have something to tell you," he said, his face glowing with happiness. "We're going to start trying for a baby." My heart leaped with joy. The idea of becoming a grandmother, of having a little piece of David to love and spoil, filled me with such happiness that I actually felt tears spring to my eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful news." I moved to hug him, but caught sight of Vanessa's face over his shoulder. Her expression was carefully neutral, but there was something cold and calculating in her eyes that made my blood run cold. This wasn't happy news she was sharing with a beloved mother-in-law. This was an announcement, a declaration of the new order of things. "We wanted you to be the first to know," David continued, oblivious to the undercurrents. Van suggested, "We tell you together, at a family dinner." Wasn't that sweet of her? I looked at Vanessa, who smiled that perfect, empty smile. "Family is so important," she said. "I wanted to make sure you felt included in this moment." But what she was really saying was clear: this child would be her ultimate weapon, her way of ensuring that David's loyalties would be permanently realigned. A grandchild would give her leverage over me that she had never had before. She could control my access, dictate the terms of my involvement, and David would go along with it because he would want to keep peace in his family. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and talk about the future. David was already making plans, talking about converting the guest room into a nursery, researching the best schools in the area, wondering aloud whether the baby would have his eyes or Vanessa's. I smiled and nodded and said all the right things, but inside I felt like I was watching my relationship with my son slip away in real time. As I was getting ready to leave, David excused himself to take a work call that apparently couldn't wait until morning. That left me alone with Vanessa for the first time since our confrontation at the house. She walked me to the coat closet, maintaining that pleasant hostess demeanor until David was out of earshot. "I hope you understand, Maggie," she said quietly. Her voice sweet as honey and twice as deadly, "that things are going to be different now. David and I are starting our own family, and we need space to figure out our own way of doing things." I turned to face her fully. "And what exactly does that mean?" "It means that your involvement in David's life is going to need to change. We appreciate everything you've done for him, but he's a married man now, and soon he'll be a father. His priorities need to be with his wife and child, not with—" She paused delicately, "past relationships." The casual cruelty of calling myself a past relationship in my son's life was breathtaking. "Vanessa, I'm not just anyone. I'm David's mother." "Of course you are," she agreed readily. "And you'll always be his mother. But you won't always be the most important woman in his life. That role belongs to me now, and soon it will belong to our child. The sooner you accept that, the easier this transition will be for everyone." David's voice carried from the kitchen as he finished his call, and Vanessa's mask immediately slipped back into place. "Think about what I've said," she whispered. Then louder, "Drive safely, Maggie. The roads look slick tonight." I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling from what had just happened. Vanessa had essentially told me that my role in David's life was over, that I was being demoted from mother to distant relative. And she was confident enough in her position to say it to my face, knowing that I had no recourse. If I complained to David, I would sound jealous and petty. If I pulled back further, I would be giving her exactly what she wanted. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than I had since those early days after my husband left. I had spent 41 years building a relationship with my son, sacrificing everything to give him the best life possible, only to watch a woman who had known him for 3 years dismantle it all with surgical precision. But Vanessa had made one crucial mistake. She had shown me exactly who she was, and now I knew I was in a fight for my family. I just hadn't yet realized how dirty she was willing to play to win. The call came at 7 in the morning, 3 days after that disastrous dinner. David's voice was strained with worry as he explained that Vanessa had come down with what appeared to be a severe case of food poisoning. She had been up all night, and he was torn between staying home to care for her and attending a crucial client meeting that could make or break a major case his firm had been working on for months. "Mom, I know it's a lot to ask, but could you possibly come over and stay with Van today? I wouldn't feel right leaving her alone when she's this sick, but this meeting." His voice trailed off, and I could hear the genuine distress in his tone. My first instinct was to decline. After Vanessa's veiled threats, the last thing I wanted was to spend a day alone with her, especially when she was feeling vulnerable and possibly even more hostile. But this was David asking, and despite everything his wife had said, I couldn't bear to add to his stress. "Of course, sweetheart," I heard myself saying. "I'll be right over." "You're a lifesaver, Mom. I owe you big time for this one." Her voice had taken on that same tone from our previous conversation, sweet on the surface but with an undercurrent of something else. I continued ironing, focusing on a particularly tricky section around the neckline. "He's biased because he's my son. Maybe. Or maybe he just appreciates talent when he sees it." She paused, and I could feel her eyes on me. "You know, I've been thinking about our conversation the other night. About family dynamics and boundaries." My hand stilled on the iron. I had hoped that her illness might have made her forget about that unpleasant exchange, or at least put it aside temporarily. "Vanessa, you're still recovering. Maybe we should save serious conversations for when you're feeling better. Actually, I think now is the perfect time. When we're alone, without David here to complicate things." She stood up from the chair and moved closer to where I was working. "I think there are some things we need to clear the air about." I set the iron down on its rest and turned to face her. "Such as? Such as the fact that you clearly have no intention of respecting the boundaries I tried to establish. You're here today, playing the devoted caregiver, making yourself indispensable to David once again." The accusation was so unfair it took my breath away. "David asked me to come. You were sick and he was worried about leaving you alone." "Oh, I'm sure he did ask. David always asks for your help, doesn't he? And you always say yes, no matter what the cost to anyone else." "What cost? What are you talking about?" Vanessa's smile was sharp and cold. "The cost to his marriage, Maggie. The cost to his ability to function as an independent adult. The cost to my relationship with my husband." I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and righteous. "I have never done anything to interfere with your marriage. Haven't you?" She moved even closer, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the lingering scent of illness. "Every time you swoop in to solve his problems, every time you cook his favorite meal or remember some obscure detail about his preferences, every time you make yourself available at a moment's notice, you're teaching him that wives are replaceable but mothers are forever. That's not what I'm doing, and you know it. Isn't it? Tell me, Maggie, what happens when our baby is born? Are you going to step back and let me establish my own relationship with my child, or are you going to be right there, ready to show me how it's really done? Ready to be the better mother, the more experienced caregiver, the one David turns to when he needs advice about his own family?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications and accusations that made my head spin. I opened my mouth to respond, to defend myself, but no words came. Because buried in her cruel assessment was a grain of truth that I didn't want to examine too closely. "I thought so," Vanessa said softly. "You can't even deny it, can you? Because deep down, you know that you don't want to let go. You don't want David to have a life that doesn't revolve around you." "That's not true." My voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "Isn't it? Then prove it." She reached past me and picked up the iron, holding it in her hands like she was testing its weight. "Step back. Stop inserting yourself into our lives. Stop making David choose between his mother and his wife, because eventually, he's going to have to pick one." The iron was still hot, steam rising from its surface as she held it carelessly. Something about the way she was handling it, the deliberate carelessness of her grip, made alarm bells start ringing in my head. "Vanessa, be careful with that. It's still very hot." "Is it?" She looked down at the iron as if seeing it for the first time, then back at me with that same calculating expression. "You know, I've always been curious about what it would feel like. The heat, the pain. Whether it would leave a permanent mark. Before I could process what she was saying, before I could react or move away, she stepped forward and pressed the hot iron firmly against the back of my left hand. The pain was immediate and excruciating, unlike anything I had ever experienced. I screamed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside me, and jerked my hand away. But the damage was already done. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, and I could see the angry red mark already forming on my skin, shaped like the triangular point of the iron. Oh my God! Vanessa dropped the iron, and it clattered to the floor. Maggie, I'm so sorry. It slipped, I didn't mean to. Oh no, this is terrible. I cradled my burned hand against my chest, tears streaming down my face from the shock and pain. The burn was already blistering, the skin white and angry around the edges where the heat had been most intense. We need to get you to the hospital. Vanessa continued, her voice rising with apparent panic. This looks really bad. I can't believe I was so clumsy. I must still be lightheaded from being sick. Through the haze of pain, I looked at her face. Her expression was perfect, shocked, remorseful, genuinely distressed. If I hadn't seen that split second of calculation before she pressed the iron to my skin, if I hadn't caught that moment of cold decision in her eyes, I might have believed it was an accident. But I had seen it. I knew with absolute certainty that Vanessa had burned me on purpose, and now she was going to play the part of the horrified, apologetic daughter-in-law who had made a terrible mistake while still recovering from illness. I'm calling David, she said, reaching for her phone. And 911. We need to get you medical attention right away. No, I managed to say through gritted teeth. No hospitals. Just get me some ice. Maggie, this is serious. You need to see a doctor. Ice first. Then we'll see. She hesitated for a moment, and I caught a flicker of something that might have been disappointment cross her face. Had she been hoping I would be hospitalized? That David would have to leave his important meeting to rush to my bedside, potentially damaging his career prospects? Vanessa brought me ice wrapped in a kitchen towel, and I held it gingerly against the burn. The cold provided minimal relief, but it was better than nothing. She hovered nearby, maintaining her performance of concerned distress. I feel terrible about this, she said for what must have been the 10th time. I can't believe I was so careless. David is going to be furious with me. Are you going to tell him it was an accident? I asked quietly. She looked at me sharply. Of course it was an accident. What else would it be? We stared at each other for a long moment, and I saw the challenge in her eyes. She was daring me to call her out, to accuse her of deliberately hurting me. But we both knew that without proof, without witnesses, it would be my word against hers. And who would David believe? His loving wife who had been sick and disoriented? Or his mother who might seem jealous and vindictive? Nothing, I said finally. Just an accident. Vanessa's smile was triumphant, though she tried to hide it. I think we should still have a doctor look at it. Just to be safe. I agreed, partly because the burn really did need medical attention, but mostly because I needed time to think. The urgent care clinic was busy, and we sat in the waiting room for over an hour. Vanessa played the part of the concerned daughter-in-law perfectly, apologizing to the nurses, explaining how terrible she felt about the accident, insisting that I be seen as quickly as possible. The doctor who examined my hand was a young resident who looked barely old enough to be in medical school. He cleaned the burn, applied antibiotic ointment and a bandage, and prescribed pain medication and antibiotics to prevent infection. It's a significant second-degree burn, he explained. You'll need to keep it clean and dry, change the dressing twice a day, and watch for signs of infection. It should heal in 2 to 3 weeks, but you may have some permanent scarring. Permanent scarring. A lasting reminder of what Vanessa was capable of, branded into my flesh. By the time we returned to the house, David was already there, pacing the living room with his phone pressed to his ear. He looked up as we entered, and his face went white when he saw the bandage on my hand. Mom, what happened? Vanessa called. And said there was an accident, but she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. I'm fine, sweetheart, I said, though the throbbing pain in my hand suggested otherwise. Just a little mishap with the iron. Vanessa immediately launched into her story, her voice shaking with emotion. I was so stupid, David. I was still feeling weak and dizzy, and I asked your mom to help me iron a dress. She was being so sweet, taking care of me all day, and then I reached for the iron without thinking and somehow knocked it into her hand. I feel absolutely horrible about it. David's eyes filled with sympathy as he looked at his wife, then at me. God, Van, you should have called me immediately. I would have left the meeting. I didn't want to interrupt something so important, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. And your mom was so brave about it. She took such good care of me today, and then this happens. I feel like the worst person in the world. I watched this performance with a mixture of amazement and revulsion. Vanessa had not only hurt me deliberately, but she was now using the incident to make herself look like the victim while simultaneously praising me in a way that seemed generous but actually reinforced her narrative. I was the self-sacrificing mother who would endure anything for her family, even accepting blame for accidents that weren't my fault. David crossed the room and carefully took my uninjured hand in both of his. "Mom, I'm so sorry this happened. Are you in a lot of pain?" "I'll be fine," I assured him. "The doctor said it should heal in a few weeks." "I can't believe you spent the whole day taking care of Van when you were dealing with this." He looked back at his wife with such love and gratitude that it made my chest ache. "And honey, you can't blame yourself for this. You were sick and disoriented. Accidents happen." "I know, but I just feel so guilty," Vanessa said, managing to produce a few actual tears. "Your mom was so wonderful to me today, and this is how I repay her kindness." They both looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to absolve Vanessa of her guilt, to play along with the fiction that this had been nothing more than an unfortunate mishap. And what choice did I have? If I accused her of doing it deliberately, I would sound paranoid and vindictive. David would be forced to choose between believing his mother was delusional or believing his wife was capable of deliberate cruelty. "These things happen," I said finally. "No one's to blame." The relief on both their faces was palpable, though for very different reasons. David was grateful that there would be no family drama over what he believed was an accident. Vanessa was satisfied that her message had been delivered and understood. David insisted on driving me home and helping me get settled for the evening. He filled my prescriptions, set up a schedule for changing the bandages, and made sure I had everything I needed for the next few days. His concern and care were genuine, and under other circumstances, I would have treasured this kind of attention from my son. But all I could think about was the look in Vanessa's eyes in that moment before she pressed the iron to my skin. The cold calculation, the deliberate choice to cause me pain. She had marked me, both literally and figuratively, and the message was clear: this was what happened to people who didn't respect her boundaries. That night, as I lay in bed with my hand throbbing despite the pain medication, I finally understood what I was dealing with. Vanessa wasn't just a selfish young woman who resented her mother-in-law's influence. She was something much more dangerous. She was someone who would hurt others to get what she wanted, someone who could cause deliberate harm and then play the victim so convincingly that even her victim couldn't expose her without looking crazy. I had two choices. I could accept her dominance, fade quietly into the background of David's life, and hope that her cruelty would be satisfied with my submission. Or I could fight back. The problem was, how do you fight someone who has already proven they're willing to escalate to physical violence? How do you protect yourself from someone who holds all the cards and plays by no rules except their own? As I drifted off to sleep, the answer came to me with startling clarity. You fight fire with fire. You play by their rules. And you make sure that when they try to destroy you, they destroy themselves instead. The burn on my hand would heal, but Vanessa had made a crucial mistake. She had shown me exactly what kind of person she was, and now I knew I was in a war. The only question was whether I had the courage to fight it. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in months. The pain in my hand was still significant, but it served as a constant reminder of what Vanessa was capable of and what I needed to protect myself and David from. I spent the day researching, planning, and preparing for what I knew would be a long and difficult campaign. Vanessa had chosen to play dirty, but she had underestimated her opponent. She saw me as a pathetic old woman clinging to relevance in her son's life. She had no idea that I was a survivor who had raised a child alone, built a business from nothing, and overcome obstacles that would have crushed someone weaker. She wanted a war? She was about to get one. And by the time I was finished, she would discover that hurting someone's family is a mistake you only make once. The morning after the iron incident, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop, my bandaged hand awkward on the mouse as I began what would become the most important research project of my life. If Vanessa wanted to play games, I needed to understand the rules. More importantly, I needed to understand her. I started with social media, something I had always been peripheral to but never really understood the power of. Vanessa's Instagram account was a carefully curated showcase of her perfect life. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, exotic vacations, and dozens of photos with David that painted them as the ideal couple. Her Facebook was more of the same, though with more family connections that gave me insight into her background. The Morrison family wealth was old money, the kind that came with expectations and pressure that I was beginning to understand might explain some of Vanessa's behavior. Her mother, Patricia Morrison, was a fixture on various charity boards and social committees. Her father, Charles, was a partner at a prestigious investment firm. Vanessa had grown up in a world where image was everything and failure was not an option. But as I dug deeper, using skills I had developed during my years managing the books for my seamstress business, I began to notice inconsistencies. The expensive lifestyle Vanessa displayed online didn't quite match the financial reality I was uncovering. The designer clothes were often photographed once and never seen again, suggesting they might be borrowed or rented. The expensive dinners were frequently at restaurants during their promotional periods or special events where she might have gotten discounted rates. Most interesting of all, I discovered that Vanessa's gallery job, which she had described as prestigious and well-paying, was actually a part-time position that paid barely above minimum wage. She was essentially an assistant, not the curator or specialist she had implied. The gallery itself was struggling, and I found records of layoffs and financial difficulties that suggested her position might not be as secure as David believed. This revelation led me to my next line of investigation: their finances. I had helped David set up his first bank accounts when he was in college, and I knew his social security number and other personal information from years of helping him with various paperwork. It took some creative maneuvering, but I was able to access their credit reports and financial statements. What I found was shocking. Despite David's successful law practice and substantial income, they were living far beyond their means. Vanessa had multiple credit cards, most of them maxed out or close to it. The mortgage on their house was larger than it should have been for David's income level, suggesting they had stretched to buy more house than they could afford. There were also several personal loans and a car payment for Vanessa's luxury SUV. That was eating up a significant portion of their monthly income. But the most damning discovery was a series of cash advances and transfers that suggested Vanessa was hiding her spending from David. She had opened several credit cards in her name only, using their joint address but presumably intercepting the statements before David could see them. The amounts were staggering: thousands of dollars in clothing, jewelry, spa treatments, and other luxury expenses that she was financing through credit. As I compiled this information, a plan began to form in my mind. Vanessa had hurt me physically and was systematically trying to destroy my relationship with my son. But she had also made herself vulnerable through her financial deception. If I could expose her lies and force David to see who he had really married, I might be able to protect both him and myself from further harm. The first step was documentation. I printed out every financial record I could access, organized them chronologically, and created a detailed summary of their debt situation. The picture that emerged was of a woman who was financially irresponsible to the point of being dangerous to David's future. If they divorced, he could be held liable for debts he didn't even know existed. If they stayed married, her spending could eventually bankrupt them both. But I needed more than just financial records. I needed to understand Vanessa's psychology, her motivations, and her weaknesses. So I began what I thought of as my surveillance phase. I started following her social media more closely, noting patterns in her posting and behavior. I discovered that she had a regular schedule of activities that David seemed unaware of. She went to expensive spas and salons, shopped at high-end boutiques, and lunched at restaurants that cost more for one meal than I spent on groceries in a week. All of this was happening during the day while David was at work, and none of it was reflected in the modest lifestyle she presented to him. I also began observing her in person, though I was careful to stay out of sight. I would park across the street from their house in the mornings and watch as she left for her various activities. I followed her to the gallery where she worked and confirmed that it was indeed a struggling business in a declining neighborhood, not the prestigious establishment she had described. Most revealing of all, I discovered that Vanessa was meeting regularly with a man I didn't recognize. They would meet at an upscale coffee shop in the next town over, always at the same time on Wednesday afternoons. Their body language suggested they were more than friends, though I couldn't get close enough to hear their conversations or determine the exact nature of their relationship. After 3 weeks of observation, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier of Vanessa's deceptions. But I still needed to find the right way to present this information to David without seeming like a jealous mother-in-law making wild accusations. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. David called me on a Thursday evening, his voice tight with stress that I hadn't heard since his law school finals. "Mom, can I come over? I need to talk to someone, and I don't really know where else to turn." He arrived 20 minutes later looking haggard and defeated. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his tie loosened and his hair mussed as if he had been running his hands through it. I made him a cup of tea and waited for him to explain what was troubling him. "It's our finances," he said. Finally. "I was going through our statements tonight, trying to set up a budget for when the baby comes, and nothing makes sense. We should have more savings than we do. My income is good, Van's gallery job brings in something, and we don't live that extravagantly, but somehow we're barely breaking even every month." I kept my expression neutral, though inside I was rejoicing. This was the opening I had been waiting for. Have you talked to Vanessa about it? I tried to, but she got defensive. Said she didn't understand why I was questioning her spending when she's been so careful with money. But Mom, there are charges on our credit cards that I don't remember making. Expensive restaurants I've never been to, stores I've never shopped at. When I asked her about them, she said they must be mistakes or identity theft. David looked at me with such confusion and pain that my heart ached for him. He was beginning to see cracks in the perfect facade, but he didn't want to believe what they might mean. What does your gut tell you? I asked gently. That something isn't right. But I don't know what to do about it. If I push too hard, it looks like I don't trust her. If I don't push at all, we could end up in serious financial trouble. He paused, then looked at me with the same expression he had worn as a child when he needed help with a problem he couldn't solve alone. What would you do, Mom? This was the moment I had been preparing for. I got up and retrieved the folder I had compiled, setting it on the coffee table between us. Before I show you this, I want you to know that I love you more than anything in the world. Everything I'm about to share with you comes from a place of wanting to protect you, not from any desire to cause problems in your marriage. David's eyes widened as he saw the thickness of the folder. What is this? Information about your financial situation that I think you need to see. But David, I need you to promise me that you'll look at this objectively, as the lawyer you are, not as a husband who wants to believe the best about his wife. He nodded slowly, and I opened the folder. For the next hour, I walked him through everything I had discovered. The hidden credit cards, the excessive spending, the lies about her job and income. I showed him the patterns of deception, the cash advances that corresponded to her shopping trips, and the mounting debt that she had been hiding from him. David's face went through a series of emotions as he processed the information. Disbelief, confusion, hurt, and finally, a cold anger that I had rarely seen in my gentle son. How did you get all this? He asked finally. I had prepared for this question and had decided to be honest. I was worried about both of you, especially after the pregnancy announcement. I wanted to make sure you were in a good position to provide for a family. When I started looking into your finances, I found discrepancies that concerned me. So you investigated my wife behind my back. The accusation hung in the air between us, and I felt a moment of panic. Had I overplayed my hand? Was David going to see this as a betrayal rather than protection? I investigated your financial situation because I was concerned about your future. What I found was evidence that someone has been deceiving you about something that could destroy your career and your life. David stared at the papers spread across the coffee table, his lawyer's mind processing the implications. If even half of this is true, we're in serious trouble. The debt alone could take years to pay off, and if she's been hiding this from me. There's more, I said quietly, then told him about my observations of Vanessa's activities, her regular meetings with the unknown man, and the lifestyle she was living while he was at work. By the time I finished, David was sitting in stunned silence. The man who had defended his wife so passionately just weeks ago now looked like someone who was seeing her clearly for the first time. I need to confront her about this, he said. Finally. Are you sure you're ready for that conversation? Because once you open this door, there's no going back. David stood up and began pacing, a habit he had developed as a child when he was working through complex problems. Mom, if what you've shown me is true, then my marriage is built on lies. Vanessa isn't the person I thought I married. She's been deceiving me about fundamental things, money, trust, honesty. How can I bring a child into this situation? The next evening, David called to tell me he had confronted Vanessa with the evidence. The conversation had not gone well. At first she denied everything, said you must have fabricated the documents somehow. When I showed her that I had confirmed everything independently, she broke down and admitted to the spending but claimed it was because she felt neglected and unloved. And the man she's been meeting with? Her cousin from California. She says they've been planning a surprise party for my birthday next month. David's voice was flat, emotionless. But Mom, the way she lied, the way she tried to manipulate me even when caught. I don't think I can trust anything she says anymore. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that my plan had worked, that David was finally seeing Vanessa clearly. But sadness because I knew how much this was hurting him, how devastating it must be to realize that the woman he loved had been deceiving him so completely. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. I told her we needed to go to counseling, that we needed to work through this before the baby comes. But honestly, I'm not sure there's anything left to work through. The counseling sessions began the following week, but they only served to confirm what David already suspected. Vanessa showed no genuine remorse for her deception, instead focusing on justifying her behavior and blaming external factors for her choices. She portrayed herself as a victim of unrealistic expectations and claimed that David's close relationship with me had made her feel insecure and driven her to seek comfort through spending. The therapist, Dr. Sarah Martinez, was a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in couples therapy and financial counseling. After 3 sessions, she requested a private meeting with David. "I rarely do this," she told him, "but I'm concerned about the patterns I'm seeing in your relationship. Your wife shows signs of narcissistic personality traits and financial addiction that go beyond normal marital problems. The deception, the manipulation, the complete lack of accountability, these are serious red flags." David shared this conversation with me during one of our regular dinners, which had resumed after Vanessa's deceptions came to light. She had initially objected to our renewed closeness, but David had made it clear that his relationship with his mother was non-negotiable. "Dr. Martinez thinks I should consider separation while we work through these issues. She says bringing a child into this level of dysfunction could be harmful to everyone involved." But Vanessa wasn't going down without a fight. When she realized that David was seriously considering leaving her, she escalated her tactics in ways that were both predictable and shocking. The first incident happened on a Saturday morning when David was at his office catching up on work. I received a frantic phone call from Vanessa, claiming that she was bleeding and thought she might be having a miscarriage. Without thinking, I rushed to their house to find her lying on the couch, pale and shaking. "I called David, but he's not answering his phone," she said weakly. "I'm so scared, Maggie. What if I lose the baby?" We went to the emergency room, where after several hours of tests, the doctors determined that Vanessa was fine and the baby was healthy. There had been no bleeding, no signs of miscarriage. When I questioned her about what had happened, she claimed she must have been mistaken, that she had panicked over normal pregnancy symptoms. But I noticed that this crisis had effectively interrupted David's workday and forced him to spend hours at the hospital focused entirely on Vanessa and the baby. It was a manipulation tactic, a way of reasserting her importance in his life. When she felt his attention slipping away. The second incident was more direct. I arrived home from grocery shopping to find my front door standing open and several windows broken. Inside, my house had been ransacked. Furniture was overturned. Papers scattered everywhere, and several valuable items were missing, including some jewelry that had belonged to my mother. The police treated it as a burglary, but I noticed that the damage seemed targeted. The papers that were scattered were mostly documents related to my business and personal finances. The items that were stolen were things that Vanessa had complimented during her visits to my house. Most telling of all, nothing was taken from my bedroom, where a truly random burglar would have looked for valuables. When David arrived to help me assess the damage, Vanessa was with him, playing the role of concerned daughter-in-law perfectly. But I caught her studying my face as I discovered each new violation of my personal space, and I saw a glimmer of satisfaction in her eyes that confirmed my suspicions. "This is so terrible," she said, her voice full of sympathy. "Who would do such a thing? You must feel so violated." I did feel violated, but not by random criminals. I felt violated by the woman who was carrying my grandchild, who had wormed her way into my family and was now systematically trying to destroy anyone who threatened her control. But Vanessa had made another crucial mistake. In her eagerness to send me a message, she had committed a crime that could be traced back to her. Among the papers she had scattered were bank statements that I had printed out as part of my research into her spending. These weren't documents that would be found in a typical home, and their presence in the mess was a clear indication that someone with knowledge of my investigation had been responsible for the break-in. I shared this observation with David privately, and he immediately understood the implications. We decided to install security cameras around my house and to be more careful about our communications regarding Vanessa's behavior. The cameras proved their worth just 2 weeks later when they captured footage of Vanessa using a spare key to enter my house while I was at work. She spent nearly an hour inside, going through my papers and personal belongings. The footage showed her taking photos of documents with her phone and searching through my drawers and closets. This evidence was the final straw for David. When confronted with video proof of her breaking into his mother's house, Vanessa could no longer deny her actions or explain them away as misunderstandings. "I was worried about what she was saying about me," she claimed. "I needed to know if she was trying to turn you against me." "So you committed a felony?" David's voice was ice cold. "You broke into my mother's house, violated her privacy, and stole her property because you were worried about gossip?" The confrontation that followed was explosive. Vanessa finally dropped her mask completely, revealing the calculating, manipulative person she had always been beneath the surface. She accused me of being a jealous old woman who couldn't accept that David had moved on. She claimed that I had fabricated evidence against her and manipulated David into doubting her. "Your mother is sick," she spat. She's obsessed with you in a way that isn't normal or healthy. She can't stand that you love someone else more than you love her. But her accusations only served to reinforce David's growing understanding of who he had married. The woman who could break into an elderly woman's house, who could burn someone with an iron and play the victim, who could lie about finances and pregnancies and family relationships, was not someone he could trust with his future or his child's welfare. The divorce proceedings began immediately. David filed for legal separation first, citing irreconcilable differences and financial misconduct. Vanessa fought back viciously, hiring an expensive lawyer with money she didn't have and making wild accusations about David's mental state and my influence over him. She claimed that David was having a breakdown, that I had brainwashed him into believing lies about her. She presented herself as the victim of a conspiracy between a manipulative mother and her psychologically unstable son. For a brief moment, I worried that her performance might be convincing enough to work. But the evidence was overwhelming. The financial records, the security footage, the pattern of deception and manipulation that had emerged over months of investigation, all painted a clear picture of who Vanessa really was. Even her own lawyer seemed uncomfortable with the case, especially when the break-in footage was presented as evidence. The most damaging blow came when David's investigation revealed that Vanessa had lied about the pregnancy timeline. She wasn't as far along as she had claimed, which meant she had gotten pregnant after David had started questioning their finances and their relationship. The pregnancy, which she had presented as a joyful surprise, was actually a calculated attempt to trap him in the marriage. Dr. Martinez testified about the counseling sessions, describing Vanessa's lack of remorse and her attempts to manipulate the therapeutic process. The gallery where Vanessa worked confirmed that her position was part-time and minimum wage, contradicting her claims about her career and income. Most devastating of all, the mysterious man Vanessa had been meeting with was revealed to be not her cousin, but a credit counselor she had been working with to hide her debts from David. The surprise party story was just another lie in a web of deception that seemed to have no end. As the evidence mounted, Vanessa's facade began to crumble completely. She started missing court dates, showing up late to depositions, and making increasingly desperate accusations that only served to undermine her credibility. Her expensive lawyer withdrew from the case, citing irreconcilable differences with his client. The final hearing was almost anticlimactic. Vanessa, now representing herself and clearly struggling financially, made a last-ditch attempt to portray herself as a victim of domestic abuse and psychological manipulation. But her claims were unsupported by evidence, and her behavior throughout the proceedings had been so erratic that the judge seemed skeptical of everything she said. David was granted a legal separation with full financial protection. The debts that Vanessa had hidden were deemed to be her sole responsibility, and she was ordered to pay restitution for the stolen items from my house. Most importantly, David was granted primary custody of the unborn child, with Vanessa's visitation rights contingent on psychological evaluation and financial counseling. But the real justice came in the aftermath of the divorce proceedings. Vanessa's financial house of cards had completely collapsed. The credit cards were maxed out, the personal loans were in default, and she had no income to speak of. The Morrison family, horrified by the public exposure of their daughter's behavior, cut off her financial support and distanced themselves from the scandal. She was forced to move out of the beautiful house she had loved so much, taking only what she could prove she had paid for with her own money. Since that amounted to very little, she left with essentially nothing but her clothes and personal items. The gallery job, already precarious, disappeared when her employer learned about the legal troubles and negative publicity. No other gallery or arts organization would hire her, and she found herself working retail jobs to pay for a small apartment in a less desirable part of town. But perhaps the most poetic justice was what happened to her carefully curated social media presence. The story of the divorce, with all its sordid details about financial deception and break-ins, had become public record. Her former friends and social circle distanced themselves from the scandal, and her Instagram account, once full of designer clothes and expensive experiences, now sat mostly empty. The burn on my hand healed completely, leaving only a small scar that served as a reminder of what I had survived. But more importantly, David had learned a valuable lesson about trust, deception, and the importance of family loyalty. Our relationship, which Vanessa had tried so hard to destroy, emerged stronger than ever. David was grateful for my protection and ashamed that he had ever doubted my instincts about his wife. He apologized repeatedly for not seeing Vanessa's true nature sooner, for putting me in a position where I had to defend myself against someone in our own family. The baby, a healthy girl named Emma, was born 6 months after the divorce was finalized. David was a devoted father, and I was finally able to be the grandmother I had always dreamed of being. Vanessa's court-ordered visitation was limited and supervised, and she showed little interest in the responsibilities of motherhood when they interfered with her attempts to rebuild her social status. As I held my granddaughter for the first time, looking into her perfect little face and feeling her tiny fingers wrap around mine, I reflected on everything that had led to this moment. Vanessa had tried to destroy my family, had hurt me physically and emotionally, and had nearly succeeded in turning my son against me. But in the end, her own greed and cruelty had been her downfall. By pushing too hard, by escalating to criminal behavior, by underestimating the strength of the bond between a mother and son, she had lost everything she had schemed to gain. David met someone new eventually, a kind woman named Sarah who worked as a pediatric nurse and understood the importance of family. She never tried to come between David and me, never saw our close relationship as a threat to her own happiness. When they married 2 years later, I gained not just a daughter-in-law but a true friend. Vanessa faded from our lives gradually, becoming nothing more than an unpleasant memory and a cautionary tale. She moved away eventually, probably to start over somewhere else where people didn't know her history. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had remarried, this time to an older man with money who could support her expensive tastes. I hoped, for the sake of her new husband and any future children, that she had learned from her mistakes. But I suspected that some people never change, that the capacity for manipulation and cruelty that I had seen in her was probably still there, just waiting for the right circumstances to emerge again. As for me, I had learned that sometimes you have to fight for your family, even when the threat comes from within. I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed and skills I never thought I would need. Most importantly, I had learned that love doesn't always mean being passive or accommodating. Sometimes love means being willing to be the villain in someone else's story in order to protect the people who matter most. The scar on my hand had faded to almost nothing, but the memory of that moment when Vanessa pressed the hot iron to my skin remained crystal clear. It served as a reminder that there are people in this world who will hurt you deliberately, people who will smile to your face while planning your destruction. But it also reminded me that I was stronger than I had ever imagined, that I could take whatever pain someone chose to inflict and turn it into the fuel for my own victory. Vanessa had tried to burn me, to mark me as her victim and her conquest. Instead, she had accidentally burned through her own carefully constructed lies, exposed her own cruelty, and ultimately destroyed the very life she had been so desperate to protect. The iron that was meant to scar me permanently had instead become the tool of her own downfall. In the end, I didn't just accidentally burn through her credit. I accidentally burned through her entire world, and I couldn't say I was sorry to watch it all turn to ash. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.